Hello, everyone. This is Pras from Burning Questions, and today it's a different episode. We've got Hibbo here, who I'll introduce in a second. But firstly, I wanted to wish Andy a get well soon. He's recovering from an illness, and it's also my first time hosting this. So apologies if there's any issues, technical issues. But I think I've nailed it down, and I've bothered as enough that. I think this should be okay, but fingers crossed. But before we move, Hibbo, it's lovely to have you again. Second time on Burning Questions. How are you doing?
Yeah, Pras, thank you for having me on. Obviously, get well soon to Andy. We know he isn't feeling very well. So yeah, it's going to be a good episode. We know that you're on the wildcard this week, so we're going to have a lot to talk about. Wildcard names obviously very popular in the community. So if we can get under the crux of it, that'll be great.
Awesome, awesome. So, yeah, let's do that. So, what we'll do today for the agenda is we'll talk about the excellent FPL underscore chases visuals. We'll talk about expected outcomes now. So, instead of looking backwards, we'll look forwards. What are the projected clean sheets for the teams? What are the projected number of goals? Then we will sort of bring that into a what does it mean for fixtures, essentially into a wildcard draft for myself and then your bus team. So, let's go straight to Chase's first chart, which is the expected goals scored. Now, I don't know about you, but the first thing that jumped out to me is that Man City and Arsenal, even though they have a blank in 12, they're still the top four teams for the number of goals that they're expected to score. So, Man City, for those that are listening, the expected goals over the next 8 game weeks, which is essentially until the World Cup, is 18.4. And then there's Liverpool, Spurs, Arsenal. So, even though you take into account the fact that they blank, these are teams that you want to own around the blank. So that was the first thing that jumped out. Other stuff, I mean, popular teams on wildcard, for example, Bournemouth, they are fifth from bottom. So they're better than Wolves, Everton, Southampton, and Forest. But Bournemouth are expected to score 8 goals over the next 8 game weeks, which is basically a goal a game. So do not expect hat tricks or braces from Solanke. He could be involved in one of 2 goals, one of 3 goals. So that should sort of temper your expectations. Leicester also sort of stood out to me. 10 goals expected in the next 8 game weeks. We usually think of Leicester as a team that is very, very attacking. But in this case, bottom 10 despite the good fixtures. What else jumps out to you, Hibbo?
Yeah, well, looking at Chase's brilliant visuals, well, like the first thing that I've noticed are Man City. They're clear, obviously, in first place, as you said, despite the blank game week in 12. So I think that's really testament to the strength of like their underlying numbers and the XG that they produce. Now, from game week 13 onwards, we know they blank in game week 12, but from game week 13 onwards, I'm looking at it now thinking I would like to leave the option of potentially adding a third City player. So I know at the minute in wildcards, most people are maybe they're obviously going to go for Haaland. They're probably going to go for Cancelo. But I think leaving that optionality of maybe having Foden or maybe even an additional defender like Walker is going to be possible. I know we're going to talk about like a clean sheet further down the line. Now, I think Arsenal were interesting because they're sitting in fourth place for the projected goals, but their attackers aren't very fashionable at the minute in the game week 9 wildcard. So I played my wildcard last week, and Martinelli was the only Arsenal asset that I've held. So again, we're looking here at 8 game week window, and I think if we squeeze the window down to say 4 weeks,
Yeah.
Arsenal are facing Spurs, they play Liverpool, and then they play Leeds. Leeds is obviously a decent fixture, but then they blank in 12. But I think in the face of that, it's a pretty difficult run. Gabriel Jesus punished me last week, but the Brazilian himself, along with Martinelli and Bukayo Saka, they're all kind of facing the chop among elite managers. For the short term, anyway, I think Liverpool are fairly similar to Arsenal in a way. Obviously, they don't blank, but they have a plum fixture this week in Brighton. But then we're looking at the 2 follow-up games. They play Arsenal, they play Manchester City. It's obviously more testing, but I think for those backing against Salah in the short term, which I have done on the game week 8 wildcard, this week is a nervous watch. But I think once we get beyond that, we'll feel a wee bit game week 8 wildcarders that don't move directly to Salah. If we survive this week, I think we'll feel a bit more comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at expected goals, this is the week. Man City expected 2.5, Liverpool 2.3. So it's similar between him and Haaland. Next week, it's way higher for City, 3.3 versus 1.4. So people who are on De Bruyne versus a Salah, that's the week to sort of make up your gains or losses if you have in this week. And then they're very similar in game week 11. Obviously, they play each other. Game week 12 is the first week that you'll want to have a Salah type player because he's clearly the best option, or any Liverpool player. You could choose to captain Trent as well, because they have the highest expected goals in game week 12. And then that continues. I mean, if you look at beyond that, who are the teams who are basically the attackers you want to own from? It's Man City, Liverpool, Arsenal, to an extent Spurs, and that's about it. So everyone looking at the Solankis, the Leicester players, even Crystal Palace, for example, Zaha. Zaha is, where is he on the list? Number 11. So after game week 12, he's expected to score about 5 goals in 4 game weeks. Or not him, the team. So very different story between the phases. So we'll talk about the phases from now to 12 and then 13 to 16 when we come to the fixture ticker. Let's go to the goals conceded. I'll come to you first before I give my thoughts. So what jumps out to you in this the goals conceded chart?
Well, I think also Manchester City were interesting. So obviously they rank best for projected clean sheets when we're looking at this 8 game week window, despite the fact that they blank in game week 12. Now, I think most FPL managers have moved away from double City defence. Looking at this table, double City defence would prove to be lucrative, but I think if we're looking at maybe the ideal 4 defenders at the minute, it's probably Cancelo, James, Trippier, and Trent would be the ideal defenders. So I think the common groupthink, I suppose, in the community is that spending a premium on someone like Diaz, whose game time maybe isn't as assured as it was previously, is a bit of a risk. And also, I think the dynamics maybe changed a bit in the FPL, where managers have moved away from the big at the back, which was kind of in vogue earlier in the season. And we're looking maybe at 3 striker formations, as you said. People are looking at maybe Haaland, Mitrovic, and then one of kind of Tony, Solanke, or maybe even a kind of bench fodder and playing 5 in midfield. Again, you're looking at a window for this data as 8 game weeks, and I think the picture would be very different if we considered solely the next 3 or 4. Yeah. And that's probably why we're only seeing kind of single City defences on a game week 9 wildcard.
Yep, absolutely. So I think if you look at this week solely, the game week 9, you have Liverpool, Man City. So Liverpool slightly higher, but not much in it. So people who are sitting on Cancelo, not Trent, or people have Trent and not looking at Cancelo on Wildcard 9, I think fair shouts, but these two are the teams that are expected to have clean sheets this week. So don't sort of go by Man United is the tougher fixture versus the Brighton fixture. Both are equally likely. West Ham is up there as well. Their defensive data in the first 8 game weeks or 7 game weeks has been excellent. So they deserve their place here. So a lot of people went Zuma, Soufal, or even Fabianski in goal in the future. So I think that's a decent shout. Game week 10, Man City is far and away the highest for clean sheet odds. So again, that's the week where if you're not on City assets, that could hurt. And that's essentially the problem. I think Arsenal can be avoided. Pretty much their clean sheet odds for the next 3 aren't great, because even the Leeds fixture, it's a good attacking fixture, but may not be the best defensive fixture. So after game week 12, you can look to get some Arsenal assets. But other than that, nothing great. Crystal Palace, number 3. So only after Man City and Liverpool, the next best defense. Now, people have looked at 6 game week samples and said they've got bad numbers, they're bad at set pieces, but they're almost forgetting the season-long data that we had from last season. Now, it could be that there's something fundamentally wrong, but at the moment, it's hard to see. And if you're going into a fixture run where Crystal Palace have pretty much the easiest run after Chelsea this game week, then you should try to have, at least if you're on a wild card, one Crystal Palace defender, whether that is Guehi, whether that is Guaita. We'll come to keepers as a dilemma when we come to my wildcard discussion, but I think Crystal Palace is a team to back. Chelsea, again, number 6. So people are looking at double ups from Chelsea defense. I think given the fact that we don't know who is nailed, but even if we knew if Fofana is nailed, I mean, this data is telling us that maybe a Guehi is better than a Fofana anyway. So Newcastle, number 7, just behind Chelsea. So the team is good. They're expected to keep about 2.5 clean sheets over the next 8 game weeks. Not bad, especially if you consider that people like Trippier or Pope can get points from other aspects of the game as well, like saves or clean sheets and bonuses or assists for Trippier. So I think it's a good shout. Leicester in 11 and 12. Leicester and Everton 11 and 12 basically tells you that they're not that bad. People thinking about Ward and Iverson, if you're saving $1 million, it's not the end of the world. You are expected to get 2 clean sheets, But that's where we are.
Well, I tend to agree with you on Crystal Palace. Like, I think the Eagles have caught the eye and they're sitting in third place in this table now. Gaeta has gained a lot of traction as the goalkeeper of choice for those on Wildcard 9. And I think in general, it's an area of our squads. And I suppose the FPL game at the minute, which hasn't really been solved, we don't really know who the best goalkeeper is because, it started off as Ramsdale. People kind of seem to move to Pope. And it's still very much up in the air. But as you said, like I think Mark Gahey at like 4.3, he's a good option. I think it depends on your team structure. He could be a solid fourth or maybe even a fifth defender because he is very budget friendly. I think Liverpool, when we're looking at this table, they really improved from game week 12 onwards. So in the game week 8 wildcard, it made sense for me to go without Trent. And part of that was basically a short-term gamble or a bet against the two fixtures, so like Arsenal and Manchester City. But from game week 12, I'm going to want Trent from then onwards. Yeah. And I think we're seeing a very different dynamic with a wild card, I think, between game week 8 and game week 9. I know a lot of people don't think there's much difference, but I think when you consider the blank game week that I had last week, it made sense to kind of fade Liverpool assets to a certain extent. But for you, it's very different because you've got Brighton at home next. You don't have the blank in game week 12. So personally, I kind of see the wild cards as a bit different. And I know in general the thought process is these teams are only a few players different. They're key players for me, Mo Salah, Trent Alexander-Arnold. And we've seen over the past in like 10 years of FPL that 2 or 3 players can lead to like huge point swings.
Yeah. When we'll come to our differences in our teams, we'll see that they look similar, but they're not that similar. I mean, we were talking just before the stream started. So we will come to that. And I think that's it, because in terms of defense, no one's really looking at. I mean, I've seen some people have Kilman or Sa. They're even below Fulham for expected clean sheets. Now, this is not the Bible, right? I mean, when people are looking at it, this is just a model by Chase, who's looked at underlying data, who's looked at the fixtures and predicted points. You can see this in the review. You can see this with FF Scouts members area. So it's a prediction, but it basically helps you take out any biases. So people think of Sa as a great pick for 5 million. Well, I have to say Pickford is a way better pick than Sa, and he's 5.5 million cheaper because, they have better fixtures. He's done better for bonus, and we sort of think Wolves is great for clean sheets, Sa is great for saves, but that was last year. They used to play 5 at the back. It was a different team, different way they were set up. I just think these are the sort of things that you can help when you look at some point projections like this.
Yeah, I think obviously I'm Irish, and I think that Nathan Collins is going to be a big miss for Wolves. I think he's been very impressive for them so far, and he got the red card recently, and he's due to miss a couple of games. So no, I don't think I would touch Wolves defensively now at the minute. I think the template kind of is what it is. Like as we've said, defensively, Cancelo, Trent, Trippier. James is a lock, really. Like, I think people have to be selecting James. I think when you're looking at those fixtures coming up, and the way Potter's going to line up, it looks as if he's definitely going to play him in the right wing back position. We're going to start to see the best of James, whereas there was always that doubt under Tuchel, is he going to play right centre back, which it was a bit of a strange kind of discourse, really, because even at right centre back, he always had good X minutes. It boosted his X minutes because he could play a number of positions, but he's at his explosive best at right wing back. So I think definitely a lock in people's teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think he's one of those people can still debate between Cancelo and Trent because of the blank or the tough fixtures. I mean, Chelsea have a steady next 8 game weeks. I mean, they have 5 away games and a couple of tough games, but it's steady. So you can sort of hope to hold him for the whole period if you choose to do that. But let's move on to the next one, which is now looking at the blocks. So essentially what we're trying to say is, if you think about your team today and you think about how will you navigate the blank, look at this 4 block of fixtures, which are very important because there's a mini fixture swing after 12. So after this slide, we'll talk about 13 to 16, but talking about only 9 to 12. So let's say this applies to people who are wildcarding in Game Week 13. This applies to people who are sort of not wanting to fall behind and work around the blanks. You see the popular picks here. So you see Leicester at the top, who play Forest, Bournemouth away, Crystal Palace at home, Leeds at home. So 3 home games, Bournemouth away, as good as it gets in terms of the next 4. Then you have Bournemouth. So you can see the reasons and the rationales for the Solanke bandwagon. They play Brentford at home, Leicester at home, Fulham away, Southampton at home. Fulham away again have great fixtures, but I'm not going to talk about them because Mitrovic is a good pick and no one else is in their team is a good pick. Andreas, you can argue, is a good budget enabler, is somebody who can throw in maybe in game week 12, not a starter in other weeks. Then you have Forest, Villa, Newcastle have good fixtures apart from Man United away, and Chelsea are steady. Because of the blanks, obviously Arsenal and Man City are bottom. Liverpool have the tough fixture run that you mentioned, which is Arsenal away and Man City at home in 10 and 11. But I would like to also say that in Liverpool, you probably have the best captain option in game week 9 and game week 12. So even in this 4-game week period, even though they have 2 difficult games, they have 2 fixtures in which it's a standout fixture. So this is the thinking for game week 9 wildcard, or thinking for me is why I want the Liverpool assets now. Is yes, the next 10 and 11 are tough, but I definitely want them in 9, I definitely want them in 12, and I can deal with 10 and 11 rather than sort of not starting with them and then planning to get them over the period. And then basically, things happen, right? You saw with Isaac, you saw with Patterson.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that easy to sort of move stuff around and plans change. So I'd rather on the wildcard, this is why you see that as a more popular strategy. People just say, I'm going to go with Salah and Trent, and then if things really don't work out, then we can change, and it's easy to come down from those defenders and the midfielders, then sort of look for them in the future.
Yeah, well, I have some thoughts generally about these fixtures, but I have a question for you, really kind of post from, I suppose, the position of those that have played their wildcard in game week 8. So if you played your wildcard in game week 8 and you went for, say, De Bruyne as your second premium with maybe a bit of cash in the bank, how would you feel about the move to Salah this week? If you could make the move, one free transfer as a straight move, considering that De Bruyne probably doesn't, well, it's a tough enough fixture against Manchester United. We really don't know which way that game's going to go. Would you make the move to Salah?
It depends on how you feel about captaincy. So I think if you're open to captaining Salah this week ahead of Haaland, and it's not even though you may think that Man United is the tougher game, Brighton, with the new manager will be more open. So you can make arguments that Salah is the better captain this week, but there is effective ownership that comes into it as well. So we were having this chat with Pranil and Ronald earlier.
Pag?
Yeah, which is basically, if you think somebody is scoring more points, then you captain them. But I feel it is not that simple. Like if two players are similar, like Salah and Haaland this week for me are very similar, then risk appetite comes into it. So if you feel like you want to chase in mini leagues, or this is the week that you want to sort of go against the crowd, it's a great week to go against the crowd, because if you go for a Salah captaincy, he probably has the bigger ceiling, because Liverpool will probably or are expected to score more goals, even though Man City's 2.5 goals odds are higher. But I feel, between us, I think they can smash Brighton, whereas Man United should do okay given how they played against Arsenal and Liverpool, who they beat. So then That's my answer. If I'm not captaining Salah, then I'd probably hold on to De Bruyne. That would be my question. If I'm looking to captain Salah, I would make the move.
I kind of think a wee bit differently in this. I kind of think that we're looking at the two players in the week, I suppose Erling Haaland and Mo Salah, who probably are predicted to score the most expected points. And in a certain sense, I would kind of think I would nearly move to Salah from Kevin De Bruyne if I had the cash, just to have the two best players in the week, if you know what I mean. Regardless of EO, I know De Bruyne has been playing very well, and I wouldn't make it as a fear move, but I just kind of think if we look at I know that this course is a bit different with Salah this season because he hasn't really hit the heights of what he has hit in previous seasons, like last season. But last season we didn't have any problem captaining him, triple captaining him against Arsenal, and like those fixtures, Arsenal's a difficult fixture, Man City's a difficult fixture, but Salah has a potential to be fixture proof at the same time. And I think if it was me and I had Kevin De Bruyne and cash in the bank, I think I would make the move. Now, just to touch on the fixtures, we can see Leicester obviously top for this 4-game week block where we're talking game week 9 to game week 12. And they play, as you say, they play Forest. They rank 4th worst for expected goals, and Burnley ranked 2nd worst over the period. So the interest in kind of James Madison is very understandable. And I know you're maybe potentially interested in Harvey Barnes
Yeah.
and your wild card as well as a potential for a double up. For those that maybe want to fade Martinelli, Bournemouth, Bournemouth's an interesting one because they face Leicester, who are basically the worst defence in the league at the moment. And I think people need to separate that from Leicester's attacking potential, number one, because I think people are looking at how Leicester are performing at the minute and thinking, oh, I don't really want to touch them, but they're still scoring goals, they've still done well. But I think they play Leicester and they play Fulham, who've been third worst for XG. Now, Solanke has gained a huge amount of traction. As a team, Bournemouth have created, I think, 2.68 XG. So, what's your general thoughts on Solanke? Because I know they're very different price points when we're looking at, say, Solanke and Tony.
Yeah.
I think in the community at the minute, people are looking at the Solanke pick in isolation. There's maybe a certain amount of ridicule, but for me, Solanke's an enabler. We're looking at teams with Solanke and they're able to have Salah, but they're also able to have maybe a James Maddison and a Zaha.
Yeah.
So I think they consider Solanke in isolation is maybe a wee bit short-sighted, and I think people should look at the bigger picture.
I absolutely agree. So I have actually thought about Solanke quite a bit, and he's been in some drafts, so I shouldn't say that I've gone off him. Although when you'll see my draft, I don't have Solanke in my team. I think he's a good pick, and if you look at the next four, he basically bridges you until the end of this phase. Now, the reasons that I am not looking at Solanke is completely different from what the XG data is saying, or what anyone else is saying in terms of how rubbish Bournemouth are. It's actually got to do with the fact that in phase 2, I don't want to have a Solanke starting every game week, and I don't want to have any player taking up 1.4 million in the bank, which will be stuck on the bench. So let me, in fact, that's a good segue into the next fixture run, which is 13 to 16. So now what we need to think is, whatever transfers we're making, we're fixated on the blank. How do we navigate the blank? How do we come out of the blank? How do we get Salah or some Liverpool assets for 12? But we're not as much focused on what happens after 12. What happens, how can we get back to certain teams that will basically go nuts in the last 4 game weeks. Why? Because we're back to the original first 8 game weeks principle, which is the third best team on this fixture ticker is Man City from 13 to 16, who play Brighton at home, Leicester away, Fulham at home, Brentford at home. Absolutely crazy fixtures. Then you have Arsenal, who play Southampton away, Forest at home, Chelsea away is harder, Wolves away. Then you have Liverpool, who play Forest away, Leeds at home, Spurs away is harder, but then Southampton at home. So point being that you will need to double up, triple up on these teams, and you need to navigate a path between now and game week 13 to end up in a situation where you can double up and triple up on these teams. And we haven't really talked about Spurs, but if you look at Spurs before, I think one thing that stood out, actually, let me go back to Spurs because there's a lot of Sun fans and obviously Andy will be pissed off as well. So if you look at game week 11 is the time where Liverpool play Man City. The team that you would back as the standout captaincy is Spurs. So one advantage that we didn't talk about having is Salah is, let's say Salah disappoints against Brighton, no hesitation, move him to a Sun, because if Kulusevski looks injured, you have a Sun spot for 2 game weeks, and then you get Salah back at some point. So there are routes to getting to a Kane. I mean, you have Kane in your bus team, and that's probably the thinking that you wanted him for Leicester in game week 8, and you wanted him as potential captain in game week 11. Same thinking. If you go for a Sun from a Salah, you could do that. And the good thing about Spurs is, yes, they play Man United in 12. Coming back to the fixtures in game week 13 and beyond, again, Spurs play Newcastle at home and Bournemouth away. So good fixture run for Spurs as well. My other point with this chart is some of the teams that we're backing now as teams that we want to hold may not be that great after. So let's look at, for example, Leicester. Leicester's run after game week 12 is Wolves away, Man City at home, Everton away, West Ham away. That's not great. I think other than Everton away, even though that's not great because Everton are looking a little bit better defensively, Wolves away not great, West Ham away not great, and the only home fixture is Man City. So this sort of puts me off double Leicester defense, or double Leicester keepers. So I know people are talking about value and they're rubbish and we should not be looking at the menu. I think if you looked at the first 4 fixtures, you could easily go there. And I can even understand somebody saying, I want to go for Leicester keepers for the first 4 game weeks and then I will figure it out. I will get a Pickford, for example, Everton at top of the ticker here from 13 to 16.
Yeah.
So you need to have a Madison plan to who do you take him out to. Now, Madison is a very nice price. He's 7.9, I think, or 8 million soon. He can go to a Foden, he can go to a Saka. So you have a nice enabler who can get you to that 8 million mid by game week 13. So have a plan for that, because that is a planned transfer that should work out given the fixtures that we've just talked about. But then what else? Because if you're going to park your funds at Solanke level or at a Tony level, now let's look at Tony. Tony plays Aston Villa away, Wolves at home, Forest away, which is great, but then Man City away. And if you look at Tony's fixtures before, Tony's fixtures are Bournemouth away, which is a bumper fixture, but then Newcastle away, Brighton home, and Chelsea at home. So players like these, I feel, are great options and they look great, and I think people are just very quick to say that these are options that I want to keep for the next 8 game weeks. I don't really think that they're options for the next 8 game weeks. If you want to have them transition into better players from better teams, do that, but don't sort of plan to hold them for the next 8 game weeks. I don't know if that's sort of coming across, Hibbo.
No, it's coming across, and I think we're effectively going to reach that stage from kind of game week 13 until game week 16. We're effectively dead ending, and the games effectively ending while we go on the kind of recess for World Cup.
Yeah.
So I don't think any transfer is off the table as such, if you know what I mean. Like for me, like you're talking about like an exit plan for Madison, potentially to go to Saka. I have Martinelli, which would give me, like, I suppose, a nice double up with Arsenal. I could probably ride the first blank by benching, I suppose, Cancelo, Haaland, and Martinelli. But Bowen's one I'm potentially looking at getting rid of, which it's strange, I think, considering the fixtures, because he doesn't have the worst fixtures when we go on to that second block either. But I think he's probably the player that I'm going to have to sacrifice if I'm going to go. Well, I have to go to Salah. Like, you know, there's no two ways about that. You have to get back into Salah. I'm very, as a manager, as you know yourself, I'm very kind of risk adverse. Backing against Salah kind of goes against my better nature, but I think it was largely driven by the blank. And I think I'm not entirely happy about the fact that we knew that Son's X minutes weren't great, because if we had a good steer on the fact that, say, Son was going to start, I think I definitely would have went for Son, because he gave you that kind of flexibility in midfield where you could chop and change that premium, and you weren't having to use kind of 2 transfers to move off a forward, etc. You know, but no, these fixtures, Palace are good right up until the World Cup recess. So, like, the popularity of, like, say, Zaha and the Palace defence, you know, it's reaffirmed by that. Now, as you said, Manchester City, they've got amazing fixtures once we get beyond the game week 12 blank. And that kind of optionality, whether you want to go for, say, Kyle Walker, if he looks as if he's still going to be nailed, or even maybe, like, you could spice it up with somebody like a Foden, because, as I said, the clock's going to be ticking down, where there's going to be a certain amount of room within the game. I think they play creatively. If we're looking at that 4 game week block, I don't think we have to get too bogged down into long-term picks. If we look at 3 home games and we think Foden's going to get the minutes, and in and around kind of Champions League, he seems to be a player that's fairly durable as well, like, you know.
Yeah. And the other thing with City is they will have the midweek off, which is game week 12. Even though Arsenal will play their PSV fixture, Man City will play no one. So they will actually have this little island of rest before game week 13, and then they'll be good to go. So this also sort of adds to the fact that you probably go for, you know, the explosiveness of the attacker rather than a second defender. But that's a discussion for game week 13. We don't need to sort of have that now. But what I did now is, you remember in the last stream when people were looking at a game week 8 wildcard, we showed them a game week 9 wildcard. And we did that because when you do a wildcard now, you want to see what would a potential wildcard be in the future. And I've talked about this in a lot of previous videos, where I want to have a plan to get to a wildcard-like team 3-4 game weeks from now. I don't want to sort of make a team just for the next 2 game weeks. So what I did was I created a wildcard 13 draft. So I know it's 4 game weeks away, lots can change, things can change, and not everybody likes to plan. But humor me, for now we've talked about good teams having good fixtures. I've thought about who are the players, who are the keepers, defenders who would want to target. And this is only talking about the structure. I haven't sort of looked at each player, but let me talk about this team for the listeners. I've got Pickford and Iverson in goal. Pickford simply because Everton are top of the ticker from game week 13 to 16. They've looked better in defense, 4.5 million. Let's not worry about it. You could obviously go Begovic as the second keeper. In defense, I've kept Trent, Cancelo, and James. You can argue that James can go, given that Chelsea's fixtures are not the best after game week 13, after game week 12. They play Man United at home, Brighton away, Arsenal at home, and Newcastle away. Not the best, but then my perspective is James. He can do well in any fixture if he's playing right wing back. So I've kept him for now. And then I've got 2 spots here for 5 million defenders. You can say these can be Arsenal defenders, it could be a second Chelsea defender, it could be a Man City defender, to be discussed. We don't need to discuss who it needs to be, but what I'm trying to say is you need a couple of guys, maybe an Arsenal defensive coverage or a second City coverage. Then let's come to midfield. We've looked at the fact that Crystal Palace's fixtures are amazing till the end, so there's no need to get rid of Zaha as things stand. Of course, things can change on how he performs over the next 4 weeks. I've brought in Saka for that Martinelli spot. That Madison spot. So you have now an 8 million mid. This could be Foden, so it doesn't need to be an Arsenal midfielder. It could be Foden to have a double City attack. You have Salah and you have Martinelli. So these are the 4 guys from good teams that have good fixtures coming up, and then you have Haaland and Mitrovic. And then a Greenwood in attack. Now, I have Greenwood here. Some people can think that maybe they will go for a Tony, and maybe they won't have an 8 million mid, or maybe they won't have James, and they won't have, they won't have an as expensive defender. So there's lots of iterations that you can do. This is my iteration because I feel like these are the players I'll definitely want. I'll definitely want triple City. I'll definitely want Trent and Salah, and I'll definitely want Martinelli plus an Arsenal player. So I came to this draft, and this sort of told me that I don't want Solanke. Because if I put a Solanke in this draft as 5.7, where do I take off 1.4 million out of here? I may not be able to afford a Saka. I may have to downgrade a Zaha to maybe a Gordon or somebody else. Or I may not have the defense that I want in terms of a double Arsenal or double City defense. What do you think? If I had to save 1.4, let's say people who went Solanke landed in game week 13. Where do you think they get that 1.4? Who do they lose here?
It's hard to see from that team who that they would lose. I actually think that team's fairly flexible because the keepers are fine. You basically have a team that could play a back 5. You've got a 4 in midfield and you've got 2 up front. So you have that flexibility really of having a spare man. But your spare man, you've achieved that by having, I suppose, Walker and Gabriel, and shifting them down to 4.3 or whatever. You're never going to gain enough cash to upgrade Greenwood. They say they'll give a Solanke. So I kind of prefer that team. I could potentially move to Solanke in the future, but I'm not completely sold on the idea at the minute. And because I haven't made the change, we know the landscape in FPL. It changes so much from week to week. And because I haven't done it now, I might not necessarily do it in 2 weeks' time. So I think a draft like this could be something that I could end up working towards because, we're looking at the Arsenal defence. We can trust it. The numbers have been good. We're looking at the Man City defence. It's ridiculously good. And if we think that Walker is nailed, would you prefer to have a Walker or a Solanke who's going to score you more
points?
That's
the point. That's my point.
I think it's a no-brainer, really. And it's also a cheaper option than having Solanke and a cheap defender, I suppose.
Yeah, so I feel like people will end up, the Solanke draft that I had, if I landed in game week 13, like you said, I would not have a Gabriel, I would not have a Walker, and I would have a Guehi and a cheaper defender, and I'd have Solanke. And the issue that I have is I would have to then play Solanke pretty much across the next 4, or I would have to play Guehi. So I'm diluting the team in a way, if you see what I mean, because I'm playing players from Crystal Palace or Bournemouth when I could be having a second Arsenal defender or a Zinchenko or a Gabriel. This is, again, very rough, but this is how I think, so this is how I present. So this is why I have sort of gone in my wildcard draft, which we can now transition to, for a no forward, no third forward. So for the listeners, I've got Guaita and Iverson in goal. We'll talk about the keepers. We've talked about the keepers to death over the international break, but we'll do a little bit more of it. We've got Trent, Trippier, Cancelo, James, and Guehi in defense. I've got Salah, Zaha, Madison, and Harvey Barnes in midfield, and I've got Mitrovic and Haaland up top, and Andreas Pereira and Greenwood will be my bench in addition to Guehi. So the thinking here is I could easily have Martinelli for Barnes, by the way. I'm basically trying to break down how I've presented the fixture blocks to say that Leicester are top of the fixture block for the next 4 game weeks. So why not have a Harvey Barnes as a punt, as the one punt that I want in my team? And then I can transition him to a Martinelli and a Maddison to a Saka. When I look at this team, and I can do a Martinelli from Barnes and a Saka from a Maddison and a Trippier to a Arsenal defender. Or it could be Foden, for example, instead of Saka. I will have 2 Liverpools that I've talked about by game week 13. I'll have triple City, I'll have double Arsenal, and I'll have James. And Haaland and Mitrovic. Or I've already talked about Haaland and Mitrovic. So I think what I'm trying to do, and now you can sort of see the thinking in the draft, which is why I went through the process of explaining the fixture blocks and I went through the process of explaining the game week 13 wildcard, is my thinking is that if I go for a Tony's a fantastic pick. Nothing wrong with Tony. His underlying numbers are excellent. I would have to give up one spot in game week 13, which could be an 8 million mid, which I value more than a Tony, which I would rather have a Foden in game week 13 or a Saka than a Tony. And so therefore, why should I commit on the Tony now, if you see the logic?
Yeah, I totally get the logic, because like whenever I'm looking, I suppose, at my future transfer plans, and I'm working from the basis of like a game week 8 wildcard team. For me, I've got Kane, who's a cash cow within that front 3, and I'm kind of thinking to myself, say I drop down to Solanke, I would have money to upgrade the midfield. I could upgrade, say, Bowen to Salah. But if I do something like that, I'm going to struggle to put together a team which has Cancelo, James, and Trent, if you know what I mean. Whereas if I look at kind of moving towards, I suppose, I think it's a good thought, a good consideration. If I look at moving towards a dead spot striker in that position, I would have the money for Salah and I would have the money to get on the Trent without having to sacrifice Cancelo, which is, you've made me think about, which is good.
Just repeat my thinking in terms of Martinelli. What I was thinking was he's got a couple of fixtures that are difficult, which is Liverpool and the blank, and then he has the North London derby, which could have goals. What I'm trying to think is, if I can have a Harvey Barnes who plays Nottingham Forest, who plays Bournemouth, that could basically take out that bit, and I would only have one enforced transfer. And the other point is that at this moment, if I don't have a third playing striker, then I don't have 11 that I can put out in game week 12. So therefore, if I have a Harvey Barnes, it's basically one transfer back to Martinelli. Instead of looking for a Cancelo to a Robertson and then Robertson back to Cancelo, that's 2 committed transfers. So that was the thinking in terms of Martinelli.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So I've talked about Solanke and the third forward spot. I may still look in this draft. I've got Greenwood and I've got Barnes. I can easily switch that to a Solanke and a Bailey. So I'm not completely against Solanke, and I think if I went for a third striker, it would definitely be a Solanke and not anyone else. Tony is a good shout, as I've mentioned in the past, but I just feel that he will suck up the funds to make my team poorer going forward in game week 13 onwards. So that's the thinking. I guess the only other question, because now we're going to go to your bus team next, is for me, I'm debating the captaincy. So you do a fantastic captaincy, Captain Sensible article at Scout. Summarize for us. I mean, where are you with game week 9? Who should we be looking at if somebody has Salah, has as Haaland, or for you, who has Kane and Haaland?
My captaincy article, by the way, is very long, but I could break it down, I suppose, on the too long didn't read. And as far as I'm concerned, the numbers aren't there for Salah. Like, you know, whenever I've looked at the data this week, we're used to, I think, Salah being like a volume shooter. And whenever I look at his data that I pulled up this week, just bear with me 2 seconds.
Yeah.
I think Salah has taken, for his last 6 matches, he's taken 14 or 17 shots. 14 of those have been inside the box. So, like, if we're looking at the players that are leading the division, I think Mitrovic has taken 28 goal attempts over the season. So, I think the Salah thing is, look, I think in FPL we can get at times blindsided by narrative, and I think we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just suddenly decide that Mo Salah's a bad player after 8 game weeks of FPL, because it just doesn't really work that way. Like, I think if we look at last season, people dismissed Son as an option. Kulusevski was the best thing since sliced bread. And look what happened. Son co-won the Golden Boot. He turned into an absolute phenomenon. So I don't think that we should change our thinking too much by outcome. But I think a key factor for Liverpool is the fact that Thiago's back. They've struggled in the midfield. They've struggled with control of the game. They've struggled with ball progression. And I think we're going to start to see maybe Jota's maybe going to become an option. Darwin had a lot of promise for Liverpool, but we could maybe see that they maybe put Jota on there as more of a kind of, I suppose, like a comfort blanket for Salah. I'm not against it, but I think it's basically a fixture play. But I think when we look at the like of, say, Haaland's numbers are just ridiculous. Like, you know, and his last game, it was like game week 8, like he scored his 11th goal in the Premier League. He hasn't blanked for Manchester City, and I think the whole point of, I suppose, my article for Fantasy Football Scout is they provide like sensible captaincy advice. Like, we're talking about a player with 73 FPL points, 23 more than Harry Kane, who's only in 50 points. And if we're looking at Haaland's his underlying numbers, he's so important to City attack. He leads the division for big chances received over the last 6 with like 10, 15 shots on target, and expected goals with 4.87. So we've kind of run out of superlatives for Haaland. I think if we're going to look at it on a fixture level, Man United it's definitely a harder fixture. Ten Hag has improved these. What I would think is, I would try and visualise how I think the game's going to play out. And I think he'll play in a low block. I think he'll try and soak up the pressure. I think he'll try and counter-attack through the wing. And I think there's a potential that Man City will pick these off. And I do think that Haaland's going to score. And I think if we're going to look at consistency here, what do I want my captain to do? I want my captain to score at a best level. And if I'm looking at Salah's output so far, despite the fixture, it's hard for me to back him. It's, you know, and it's not even about EO. And I know a lot of people are talking about Haaland's going to be backed by maybe 150% EO. I'm not afraid of EO. I'll pick the player that I think is the best player. But I do think the best players in the FPL will consider risk management. And I think backing against the best player in the game at home in a derby match, it's tough.
Yep.
I think if I had both this week, I think I would still be in Haaland, if I'm being totally honest. And I think it's a tough decision because of like of yourself, Abdul, you're playing the Wildcard in Gameweek 9. And I do think we'll see people with Salah Haaland teams with Haaland captain, Salah vice.
It's a bit
And
like last week.
I have Kane in that position, and I'm thinking, I don't hate Kane because he plays Arsenal. He's got a fantastic record against Arsenal. Kane's numbers, Kane's just behind. Like, if we look at the last 6 games, he's just behind Haaland. I think Haaland's XG is 4.87. Kane's is 4.57.
Yeah.
You know, and Kane's numbers have started to creep up, you know, because he started off, he's slow, the rhythm starts to come, the shots start to come. And I don't really hate having Kane in that position. So, personally, am I slightly afraid of not owning Salah? But does the fact that he's not, I suppose, heavily owned by the field make me feel a bit better? Yes. He's a huge differential, but I think the position that you're in at the minute and other Game Week 9 wildcarders, you're a bit tentative about maybe putting the armband on Salah, and I think that is telling. I think that tells all we need to know, because the shot volumes aren't there. Like, you know, I think when we see Salah at his best, people will say, "Oh, he's creating more chances than he's ever." He hasn't been creating great chances. You know, he hasn't been creating big chances. He hasn't been producing big XA. So I don't know. I think if it was me, it was Salah, Haaland, I would probably pick Haaland.
I mean, you had the dilemma last week, right? You had Kane and Haaland, and Kane was. I mean, ultimately Kane ended up outscoring. So do you regret not going Kane?
No, I don't think I do. I just, I think as an FPL manager, I produce my best stuff in perma captaincy type scenarios where captaincy is also almost removed from the game to a certain extent. And I don't really have a decision to make. I just think, well, he's a great player. I'm just going to put it in Holland, and I'm not going to give it much thought. There's obviously the opportunity within that to get creative and think, like Kane was, I think, if we're going to look at expected points, he was probably marginally better than Haaland last week. But again, risk management plays a factor.
Yeah.
Well, people can say pick the option which you think is going to score the most points. But ultimately, over the end of the season, if I in that scenario, if I'm going to get Kane's points in full as such because he's not like a 100% plus EO player, what's the sense of me in that scenario backing against Hans EO? And I don't see that as being afraid of EO. I see that as common sense. I don't know about you.
No, look, I hear you. I hear you. My thinking this week is I could still get swayed to Salah. Look, I mean, things change between now and Saturday, but at the moment, the thinking is if Salah does really well, then I'm ahead of the game because I own Salah and the others don't. Um, if he doesn't do well, then I don't want to get too behind the game because I also don't have De Bruyne, for example. A lot of teams are sitting on De Bruyne and Haaland, and if I have a bad game week and Salah doesn't do well and City absolutely smash Man United, you sort of get the double hit with not having De Bruyne and not having Haaland captain. So I'm trying to hedge a little bit, and I think
Mm-hmm.
in certain cases I'm okay to hedge. That's because we play this game to sort of play against other people. We don't just play to get the highest score. So oftentimes it's correlated. If you get a high score, you beat other people. But I think
Mm-hmm.
certain decisions can be taken with respect to what the competition is doing if the decision is close. And I think the decision is close between Salah and Haaland. So that's my thinking in terms of captaincy anyway. At the moment, I would, if you sort of pushed me, I would say probably I would go Haaland. Um, but things can change. We may get some news and, the press conference from Klopp is different. I don't know. Or I get some FOMO and some good managers I'm seeing are also looking at Salah. I don't know. Things could change, but at the moment, I think I'm looking at Haaland.
I think the landscape in Holland has kind of changed massively because when he joined the league, we spoke the last time I was on Burning Questions, and there was so much narrative about Holland. Lots of the talk was about his injury record, and like people talk about, don't read too much on the small samples. It was basically a small sample injury record, and people were saying, "Oh, he's maybe only going to play every other game when the schedule gets packed. He's going to come off just after the 60th minute." And none of these things have turned out to be correct. Like he's very much up to the standard of the league. He very much plays the minutes, and the minutes have now, I suppose, been reflected across kind of all kind of common models
Yeah.
that we would refer to for about a sense check. So I don't think Man United are a powerhouse because when we look recently, they've kept 2 clean sheets, but they've been against Leicester and maybe Southampton. They beat Liverpool. I liked your game plan against Arsenal. I liked your game plan against Liverpool. Do I think similar tactics and game plan are going to work against Manchester City? I don't know. Like I just kind of see Manchester City in a kind of different stratosphere. And I was watching a few tactical videos where he's like, or Ten Hag likes to push the fullbacks up, and he likes to drop Eriksen on the kind of a position where he's going to hold the fort in defence whenever those players are pushed up. And I don't really know how that's going to work if they come up against De Bruyne and Haaland playing in the counter attack, because there was so much narrative in pre-season about Haaland's a counter attacking forward, and he's shown now, well, he is, but he can also do it as deep as the penalty box. So if he has an opportunity to counter attack, I would be a wee bit fearful. So no, for me, from what I've seen in the season so far, I just couldn't go against Haaland. It's just he's receiving too many big chances. Everything that Manchester City are creating is effectively going through him. And at the minute, for me, it would be like, going against Haaland would be kind of forcing it. Now, I know people are talking about going for Madison this week. Too much flair pick for me.
Yeah,
I couldn't, having Madison's enough. And this brings us back to kind of ownership, common sense, risk management. playing the game right to a certain extent, although people take offence to that, saying you have enough Madison by just having Madison itself. You don't need double Madison. Forget about that. But I think Salah's a tricky one. And you know me, I don't mind a punt and captaincy. I don't mind. We had some good ones last season with Ronaldo, Reece James, and stuff like that. But I have to feel it. And this week I don't really. But you know what? This week I don't really feel it. There is going to be weeks down the line because we've seen so many cancellations already in the schedule. We're going to see double game weeks.
Yep.
And hopefully there's going to be double game weeks which don't include Haaland, and we can go, okay, right, well, we can now take it on. And that's your moment to kind of pick and choose your spot and say, well, I'm going to attack this week, and I'm going to, I'm going to go for the pot, and I'm going to go for gold. Maybe this week's a week, but I don't really feel it.
Okay, I hear you, and that's very, very well put, and I agree with you on Maddison as well. If this was the game week where City was playing Liverpool, and you want to go against a Haaland, go for Maddison captain, because when you captain a player like that, a flair pick, you're not only hoping that the flair pick comes off, that the other one you've gone against does badly. I don't think this is the week to do it, but it's a good shout. I mean, Maddison has good potential. This is why I'm looking at a double up with Barnes. So I am definitely not considering it, but I think it's Haaland or Salah or Kane or Son in the conversation for me, and I think at the moment Haaland sort of wins out. So let's move on. What we're going to do is, Hibbo, I'm going to read out my team once more because there was a little section that was cut off. So I'm going to read my team. It's Guaita and Iverson in goal. It's James, Guehi, Cancelo, Trippier, and Alexander-Arnold. I've got Barnes, Zaha, Maddison, Salah, and Andres Pereira in midfield. And I've got Greenwood, Mitrovic, and Haaland. So like I said, I've gone for a no-striker formation because I didn't want to commit funds up top because I need them for a potential restructure in Game Week 13. And I've gone for Barnes as somebody who I wanted instead of a Martinelli in Game Week 12. So apart from that, fairly standard. Let's go to your team and then we'll do some Q&A because we got some Q&A on Twitter as well. So I've got your bus team up now, Hibbo, if you want to read it.
Yeah, I'll go through it. So just I have one free transfer at the minute and I have absolutely nothing in the bank. So I'll just read through my team from back to front for the benefit of the podcast listeners. So at the moment, I have Nick Pope in goal, João Cancelo, Trippier, James as a three-man defence, Jared Bowen, Martinelli, Zaha, and Maddison, a four-man midfield. And then I've got Kane, Haaland, and Mitrovic, which looks like quite a big strike force. On the bench, I've got Iverson. Perisic I've got on the bench first sub at the minute. That could maybe change. I've got Andreas second sub and Emerson of West Ham as my third sub. So as I've said, I've got one free transfer. I have nothing on the bank. So for me, the likely move this week is to save a transfer. My real concerns for my team, and I think it's going to be similar for anybody of a kind of game week 8 disposition, is that I don't have any Liverpool. I can't get back on the Liverpool without taking a hit. I don't really believe in the numbers. I wouldn't take a hit to get Salah unless I was, say, for example, in need of a captain and really going to captain him. In such a situation, I would think that would be fine, but I'm going to captain Haaland. So in terms of kind of considerations going forward, Salah and Trent are going to be big considerations. As we've spoke about, I could downgrade Kane to, say, Solanke for cash. I could upgrade Bowen to Salah. But I also have to be mindful of how the Game Week 12 blank is going to play out because I can't have any more than 3 players. So I've got a lot to kind of think about there. But at the minute, I'm on Haaland captain. I'm on Maddison vice. Perisic first sub. It could change, but yeah, save transfer, born week.
Yeah, I think in terms of looking at the team, the problem areas, I don't know if Emerson gets his place back. Perisic potentially,
Probably not.
how much you can rely on him in Game Week 11. He's a great pick, but it's the X minutes, and then Bowen. So I think those are the ones that you restructure to get, and then Kane, like you said, for example, Kane and Bowen to Tony and Salah works, right? I think it works. So
it works, yeah, it does work.
So there's lots of options that you can go, and you're sort of thinking about Game Week 11 as well, Game Week 12 in terms of the blank. So I suppose the Liverpool guys will come after that, right? So Game Week 12.
Yeah, I didn't feel entirely great about, I suppose, my wildcard in Game Week 8. I scored 55 points. I suppose I felt a wee bit down on my luck, but what I tried to do with this wildcard team was I tried to set it up in such a way that it wasn't going to feel completely out of date in Game Week 9.
Yeah.
So like I brought on Zaha and I sat him on the bench. I had James and I sat him on the bench. Bowen was a bit of a punt. I had to play Andreas, which wasn't really ideal, but I don't know. My thinking in general was like Fulham scored 3 goals against Nottingham Forest. Did not get any return amongst kind of Mitrovic and Andreas. Kind of unlucky considering they've been kind of their two best attacking players, I suppose, for the season. But I don't feel a million miles away from like a game week 9. I'm maybe about three or four transfers away from being completely honest,
Yeah.
which isn't great. But I think all my eggs in the basket are of hoping that I suppose that Salah doesn't really absolutely destroy it against Brighton, because I think if Salah kind of scores less than 10 points and I managed to get through game week 9 in one piece, I won't feel so bad looking at my team for like game week 10 and game week 11 when Salah's going to face, I suppose, Arsenal, Manchester City. And at that point, with 2 transfers, there's going to be a bit of optionality to kind of move him back and I suppose move Trent on it, I suppose, at some point. But I kind of think for Trent, it could be make or break this week, because if Trent doesn't do his stuff against Brighton, I think it could be just sold on mass, if I'm being totally honest. I don't know.
Fair
I don't
enough,
know
fair
how
enough.
you. I don't know what you think of that. What do you think of that?
I mean, people who wanted to sell him have sold him. People who have now got on him probably want to keep him for game week 12. So I certainly am not looking at that position because I want Trent from game week 12 onwards for sure. So for me,
Yeah.
the next 3 game weeks are just bonus. So despite whatever we're talking about, Liverpool are still the second highest in terms of clean sheet expected. He is still the
Mm-hmm.
highest XA defender in the game. So I mean, from my
Mm-hmm.
point of view, people can sell him if they want. I wildcarded to sort of get Liverpool guys because I believe in Salah and Trent, and it sounds strange to sort of have conviction over that when we've believed this for the last 3 years, but I don't think a blank will change anything for me. For either, I mean, for Salah, it could simply because the Sun opportunity is right there. You could go for a Sun for 2 game weeks and then get him back, but I think for Trent, he's there. He's gonna stay.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's. I suppose that question wasn't really kind of aimed at yourself. It was more aimed at
The
like the
masses.
casual managers. I think the masses, casual managers, I think could maybe start to lose patience, and maybe they could sell him a mass, but really, how's it going to affect his price? Because he's already below his base price of 7.5, so he's going to drop probably at best 0.1. So it's not going to affect you much in the grand scale of things. But as you say, Trent's a long term hold. Um, I kind of thought the England stuff was interesting because he's very likely to miss a World Cup squad, and I think Trent scorned, you sometimes maybe see a bit of a reaction.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, there's
fair.
there's there's been games recently where there's been circumstance recently, and I know maybe people in the analytics community will say this is narrative or whatever, but I do think you kind of see these kind of things where the players maybe been scorned a bit, and he's not going to go on the plane to Qatar, and I think we could see a bit of a reaction from Trent. And I suppose in your position to have both those players as differentials going into this week is crazy when you think about last season.
We'll see how it goes. At least it's fun that we're diverging, right, in terms of strategy. So, okay, good for you, Captain Haaland. So it's fairly straightforward for you saving transfer. The team looks great, by the way. I wanted to also echo what you said. You sort of sacrificed a few points last game week, um, but the team, because of that, because you benched James, had Madison in your team, benched Zaha. These are 3 fantastic players that everyone on their wildcard team has. So I think the team looks solid. I hope Bowen pays off for you because that's the point where you're slightly different from most game week 9 wildcarders and some game week 8 wildcarders. So hope that pays off. Let's go to
I
some
don't feel
questions.
great about the
Go
I
ahead.
don't feel great about the Bowen pick at the minute. Um, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna do some questions before we sign out. There's a question on from Schnaps, who's asking Salah now or later. So look, this thought has come to not my mind, but it has come in a lot of questions on. You can just avoid Salah. Like I'm talking about Salah to Son next game week. Why don't you just start with Son? Or why don't you just start with a De Bruyne because De Bruyne will have the good fixture in game week 10. So you obviously have De Bruyne. Sorry, you have Kane. But if I wanted to sort of
Mm-hmm.
make you think that today, if you were wildcarding, would you consider any of the other midfielders? Or would you say, let me go Salah, take see if I have points, and then I can move.
I would buy Salah in a heartbeat. I wouldn't consider KDB or Son. It would just be automatically Salah. I think it's a right play. I think if we're looking at point projections and I suppose the horizon, if we're going to look up until this kind of World Cup recess, every kind of optimal solution will tell you, look, pick Salah. So
I mean, there's
I,
still a
I
lot
wouldn't.
of the non-Salah believers have cropped up. So look, I don't. My answer is absolutely not. Once has Salah left my draft. Well, as a matter of fact, he's never entered the actual draft because he's meant to fall and he hasn't fallen yet. But in my thoughts, he's not left any draft. But for people who wanted to go Son, who wanted to go De Bruyne, I think for the first time, these are all fair options because you have another Haaland as a captain option, right? I mean, we're sitting here talking about Salah, but not captaining Salah. So the threat of going against Salah, if you feel like going against Salah, you could. But personally, me and I think Hibbo, you're very similar to me in terms of thought processes. He's still the second best or the best player in the game.
He doesn't become a bad player overnight. And I do think we're going to reach a point in the season where he's going to hit the big hole and everybody's going to obviously jump back on him again. So if I was in your position and I was playing a wildcard this week, I would go Shaw and Haaland as my two premiums. I suppose my answer.
Excellent. All right. So Ash Patel also had this question on going on Sun on wildcard. So I think we've answered that. Let's go to Everton keepers. So I tried to answer that on my wildcard section. So in case it got cut out, let me just answer that again. So my thinking on the keepers is, because I look at the structure in game week 13 and I need funds in my 10 outfielders, I don't feel like I need to go for a Pope or an Allison or a Mendy. If I'm talking about 4.5 keepers, at the moment my preference is still Guaita. But there is obviously rotation risk with Guaita. So I would love for Brendan Rodgers tomorrow, which is Friday, to come and say that we're going to give Iverson a shot so that I have some insurance as a second keeper. If I don't get that, and if I don't get Graham Potter coming in saying that Kepa is going to be our first choice, then I think going for a Everton double up of Pickford and Begovic is quite fine. I think there's not a lot of clean sheets that I see coming up, but save points are there. And oops, you have been muted. Yep. So the save points are there, and you could get some bonus. So I think it's a fair shot. Next question, I'll come to you, Hibbo. Watkins. So there's a question on what do people think about Watkins in attack as your third striker?
Well, I suppose look at it from a fixture point of view. They've got Leeds in game week 9, Forest in game week 10, Chelsea in game week 11, and we'll look at Fulham in game week 12. Three of those games, their three best fixtures are away from home. I'm not sure I trust Aston Villa, and I think the price that you're going to pay for like a Watkins, I would probably rather have a Tony, if I'm being totally honest. It's a kind of position where I wouldn't take a risk. It feels like kind of going against the crowd for the sake of going against the crowd. And I haven't really seen enough from Watkins. I haven't really seen enough output. They think, well, he's a better pick than Tony. No, it wouldn't be for me. That might sound like kind of very close thinking, but I sometimes have very kind of definite views about players and how I want to play the game. I think we're all the same.
Yeah.
And for me, no, I don't think I would jump on Watkins. I do think there's a certain amount of uncertainty with Aston Villa. I think they could play another game and they could lose badly, and next thing they would be talking about, well, is Gerrard the right man to lead them forward? And there have been question marks about Gerrard from sometimes when his team doesn't do well, he changes his system from like a 2-striker system to a 1-striker system, and you just don't really know how that's going to pan out. So I probably wouldn't touch Watkins.
Yeah, I think the underlyings are very different. But look, it's a pure fixtures play. Aston Villa have some fantastic fixtures coming up. They play Leeds away, Nottingham Forest away, both great fixtures. Then they play Chelsea at home. Then they play Fulham away. So the next 4, and then Brentford at home. So the next 4 out of the next 5 are absolutely fantastic. You have to take a leap of faith, like I am taking with Harvey Barnes potentially, or some people are taking with Solanke. So it's not too different, but it's the price as well. He's also 7.2 million instead of a 5.7 million. or a 6 million. So it's a leap of faith, but if you believe in the fixtures, he is nailed, possibly on penalties. So you could do worse than a punt. Um, right, Chelsea. So what do you think, Hibbo? I mean, most people have only James. There's options like going for Mendy and Kepa in goal. You could go for a Fofana if you thought that eventually he'll get his place. Sterling, people are talking about Madison. Sorry, not Madison. Mount. And then in attack, people are talking about Havertz or even Broya. What are your thoughts?
I think Chelsea are very much a wait and see for me. I want I want to watch Premier League games. I want to see, I suppose, how they pair on with Potter. I think Sterling's not. I don't think Sterling's a bad option. I think his data has been pretty good, but I think he's kind of awkwardly priced. Where we're looking at he's roughly around the kind of 10 million mark. He might be exactly 10 million. You know, you're nearly entering kind of premium territory. Like, you know, we're at the minute where we're trying to, if we're looking at this kind of fixture run, we're trying to squeeze 8 million midfielders onto our team while still having nice forwards and still having a nice defence. I haven't really played around with a draft where I could bring Sterling in for that, but I would imagine he's going to hamper your point potential amongst like having your Zahas, your Madisons, and people like that. So Mount as well, a bit of an unknown quantity until we kind of see what Potter's going to do. But I don't think, look, again, if we're going to talk from a kind of risk management point of view, not having these players, it's not going to kill you. You know, you cannot have Sterling, you cannot have Mount, you can watch the games and you can feel good about yourself. So I don't think we need to rush out and buy them. I think maybe in time Chelsea could become a double defence team. But again, let's have a look and see if Fofana plays.
Yeah.
Let's have a look and see how they line out in terms of their defensive shape if Fofana gets some kind of regular minutes. And if he's the one, then double up by all means. Or as you say, bring in the keeper. Maybe there could be a value keeper there. But I would be more inclined with a team like Chelsea to go double defence. But even when they've had a really kind of, I suppose, a settled enough team under Tuchel, I nearly always kind of had James as, I suppose, you know, there was an argument to have Chilwell last season. People maybe picked up Havertz on around double game weeks and things like that, but I don't necessarily think we need to have teams loaded with Chelsea players.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I think yes. Of all you said, I agree with everything. And Sterling, I think, is a little bit more enticing. I think if people wanted to go freemium, him as the third premium, I think that works. Maybe less so with the Salah, but if you wanted to go Haaland, Kane, and Sterling, I looked at a few iterations there. It could be doable, but it's basically then it comes down to how much sacrifices you're making to have that Sterling spot, and you're losing a third premium defender and maybe a not so good striker. So then you come back to why don't I just distribute the funds and get back to it? So that was the change. But I think Sterling could be in our teams at some point this season, given that he looks to be the one who's actually going to make things happen. We're only basing this off one Champions League game where they played a Salzburg team that was very vertical, right? So the reason people say that Sterling played on the left wing or the left wing back or the Trossard role is because they play so vertical, they play so in the middle of the pitch that the wide spaces are open. So they don't really attack from the width. So therefore, Sterling could keep the whole left wing to himself without being pressured by other attackers. So it could completely be a strategy against this opponent in the Champions League, and we see different Chelsea in the next game week. So I agree with you. It's a wait and watch, and you take it from there.
The player from Chelsea that I would be most looking to wait and watch is Ben Chilwell.
Of course.
I think,
of course,
you know, we look at kind of his historic production at Chelsea. He was phenomenal, like in terms of what he can do going forward, goal threat, assists and stuff like that. And I think if Chelsea get their act together, tighten up defensively, and maybe can keep the clean sheets as well, I think Chilwell has big potential. But again, it's a wait and see, because I think the assumption is this: Sterling's maybe going to play left wing back. You know, Cucurella's about. You can't keep Chilwell out for too long. He's going to come under the picture at some point. I think. I don't think he can stay out forever.
Yeah,
you know.
I agree. He was my number one pick that I wanted, but I can't go for on this wildcard because it was meant to be. I mean, he was supposed to have some time off, getting into the team. He has even started coming back into the team, but then not starting for England again, not even being in the squad. It just doesn't feel right. So it sounds like a pick we'll have in second half of the season, not this half. So, But anyway,
possibly.
I think we can leave it there. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Hibbo, for stepping in and auto subbing for Sonaldo. I mean, it felt very seamless. So thanks for doing it, and hopefully we've given our views on the wild card and where things stand. But look, there's still another round of press conferences to come, more information to sort of take in. But let's see where we get to.
Yeah, totally agree.
All right. So thank you very much, Hibbo. We'll look to have you on soon again. I mean, you're fast becoming a regular. It was the second appearance in the first 9 game week. So hope to do more of these with you, and hope people enjoyed it. So good night from me.
Okay, and good night from me. Thank you.